Good morning, everyone. I'm Dawn Garcia, and I am with Curtis Clarke, who's going to be my co-presenter for this. We're going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to be a little bit more informal, and we are going to pass the microphone between each other during this talk.
I'll sit down for now.
Yes, please. So we're going to talk about the NI 43-101, and actually the talk that John Mark gave was a perfect precursor to our talk, because did you notice at the very first he gave a disclaimer? He talked a lot about he's a public company, and so therefore why is he saying this? Why? And yesterday we saw more people who gave disclaimers. Well, it's all about NI 43-101, national instrument, and it's a number because you can find it in the regulation. This is a Canadian regulation. And I liked how we brought in the global thought about the industry and how it affects Mexico, because this is the gold standard for public disclosure reporting in the world. And it's being used here in Mexico by lots of different companies. Did you see all those companies that were listed by John Mark? Those are public companies. That's why he has so much information from those press releases. This is for everyone here who could be a potential investor who wants to believe that what this geologist is telling you, because we can believe it because it's transparent. It's giving the public confidence in what we're doing in mining. So, what is NI 43-101? What do we use it for? It is simply a regulation from Canada. And this is the shifty geologist prospector that everybody fears, because frankly there were a lot of times in the past that people invested money and it was not for a real deposit. So this act, the NI 43-101, requires how you're going to give information and disclose it to the public. And it does not specify everything it is to be disclosed, but it is the regulation, the first one, that really made a difference in giving the investors confidence in mining. So it incorporates a lot of different guidelines, standards. People will refer to the fact, oh, I use JORC, or I use the CMI, the Canadian Institute of Mining. I will have used some sort of a guidance document that was developed by a different organization that tells me, you know, how do I actually apply this? But the NI 43-101 says, yes, you will report an estimation using a standard that's considered to be professionally industry standard. So it's really about timely, reliable information, and it gives those investors a chance to actually make a good investment. Got to make sure. Okay. So why did this come about? Well, in the 1990s, there were a lot of scandals. So one of the big things is Bre-X, which was a Canadian company that basically defrauded everyone. And there was a lot of money lost. There was a movie with Matthew McConaughey about what happened, so you can read the book about what happened in the U.S. with Enron. So when that happened, it created more financial reporting standards. Now, that's actually been moved a little bit further along also, so that we now have something called the SK 1300, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more. So the big three things that support this public confidence in mining are the qualified persons, the standards and best practices that are made to be used during the creation of what's called the technical report. And we're going to talk about each of these three items, the people who are behind it, the practices that they're using, and the technical report is the final product that the public gets to see. And when I say the public gets to see it, I mean that. Anybody who's got a computer and internet, They can go up to SADAR and download any of those technical reports. So the importance of this in Mexico is that look at how many Canadian companies are operating or wanting to operate a mine in Mexico. They're doing exploration or they're operating. So that's a lot of different companies, and that's a lot of money that John Mark was talking about being spent in Mexico. It's very important for most of us here at this conference because so many of us are working for companies that are publicly listed, whether they're listed on a Canadian stock exchange or listed on a U.S. stock exchange. They're the ones who are being very transparent in what they're doing. Is this one mine or yours? Okay, sorry, I'm coordinating with my partner here. So we're going to talk about how this all relates together. So we've got the standards and the qualified person. And if you have ever been a qualified person, I hope that you're going to walk away from this talk thinking about that is a huge weight of responsibility on your shoulders when you do this. Everyone is relying on you to give the best information possible. It's reasonable, it's been looked at, it's been validated. So it's really important that when we sign off on one of these reports, we understand the responsibility that we're taking on. So the other thing that I wanted to mention here is the CIM, which is usually the guidance document that gets quoted quite a bit for people doing their technical reports. That's the Canadian Institute of Mining. They have a lot of guidance document. It's all public information. You download the guidance, you look through it, and you make sure that you go back and check your list. Did I put in everything? Did I do everything? That then I can defend what I just wrote, and it's going to be accepted by anyone looking at that report. Okay, I am going to hand this off to Curtis now.
Thank you, Don. So we ask ourselves who needs to file in Canada under NI 43-101, and basically any publicly listed company. If you're listed in that country, Canada, and you're doing work anywhere in the world, you're obligated to file technical reports to inform the public, the investing public, about what you're doing. And a technical report must be delivered to the public within 45 days of a public utterance. And I'll explain what we mean by public utterance in a moment. So what is public disclosure? It's any oral or written statement that is made about your property. And it's made on behalf of the issuer company, that would be the mining company that's listed, through press releases, conference presentations like we're seeing here today, websites, etc. And whether or not that information has already been filed with securities regulators, if you make a public utterance, then you're obligated by this law to file on SEDAR, which is an acronym for the publicly held location to file these documents on the web. And you have 45 days to do it. So the role of 43-101 is, it's the instrument. It's been around 20 years now. It's coming on to its 20th birthday next year. And it's a living document, it's a living act or act of parliament in that it gets revised from time to time. It was last revised in 2011, and I'll speak some more about that now. But the purpose of it is to provide balanced, unbiased information to the public so they can make a reasonably informed decision about their investment dollar. And it must be easily, reasonably understood. And I pull out the little jab at geologists because they love their swath plots and QQ plots, and that's fine. It's important underlying information, but we don't need 20 pages of it in a summary report. So we have to govern ourselves about the information that we're divulging and getting the right message across to show that we have confidence in the technical work that's being done, to show that it's verifiable, yet not get bogged down in the details. So it must be based on reliable, verifiable data, and that's the role of the qualified person to do that verification work. So It must be consistent with standardized terms and definitions, and that's why the reference earlier to certain standards. Of course, the reference Don made was to CIM standards, Canadian Institute of Mining, which follows from Canadian legislation for this tool. Bottom line, it must be signed by the qualified person, and the qualified person will be defined in a moment. What is NI 43-101 not? It's not a guarantee of good work, and that's an important consideration. How many times have we heard people say, hey, I have a 43-101 report? Well, that tells me nothing about its content. What that tells me is that someone has followed a prescribed format, which is prescribed by this law, about how you divulge public information. It has nothing to do with the content. It could be an exploration property. It could be a feasibility study. It could be an operational report of a mining company that's already operating. So there's many different gradations of the information that's being divulged, and that's dependent on where the property is and where the company is. It's not a definition of practices. It refers to practices that are published and revised from time to time by an industry association that is peer-reviewed. And it's certainly not a vetting process at the regulatory agency. The regulatory agency is tasked with the job of policing the information that goes to the public. So they take random samples, like a border guard would. They take random samples of the information that's being presented in these technical reports, and they make commentary on it. And those commentaries can sometimes be as simple as, please explain yourself on point 1, 2, 3, or it could say, you've misspoken, you have not been honest, or you have not been clear and fully transparent, take your report down. They have that authority to order your report to be trashed. Oh, and the bottom line, it's the responsibility of the issuer. So that's the mining company or the exploration company. It's their responsibility to ensure that the report is true and complete and transparent. Now, they in turn rely on their technical specialists to have the technical information in there, and that's where the qualified person comes in. So as Don mentioned earlier, the three legs of the stool are the qualified person who bases his or her work on the CIM standards and CIM best practices that are published and available to anyone, and they generate the technical report. The securities regulators looks to the qualified persons to be the technical gatekeeper of all the information that's divulged. That's why the role of QP is so important in this process. And 43-101, or any similar standard in other countries that are now coming about, can only function if the qualified persons understand their role in upholding the public interest. So they're there to work for the investing public. Now, the investing public doesn't pay the technical qualified person's salary directly, but indirectly they sure do, because it's the issuing company that goes to the market to use other people's money to do more work, like Jean-Marc was just explaining to us. And the confidence in the information that's being divulged to the market is key to success of this process. So the qualified person, there's three elements to the qualified person. There's standards of education, so that the whole industry understands that people are properly trained to explore and to define mineral deposits for the eventual exploitation and the recovery of valuable metals. There are standards beyond that which are defined in the qualified person definition, which says not only must you have a degree, you must have experience that is relevant to what you're talking about in your technical report. So just, if I'm a mining engineer and all I've ever done is recover lithium from brines in Chile, that does not qualify me to speak on the mining of nickel ores in Norilsk or in Sudbury. So the degree is is the technical basis, but the experience brings the expertise. And that's necessary, and it's relied on for a qualified person to make that statement. And of course, you have to be registered. You have to be registered with, in Canada, a domestic recognized registering association, generally the professional engineering or professional geologists, but also there is a list of internationally recognized overseas professional organizations that the Canadian system recognizes as equally professional. And there's a list of those. So that takes care of the ethics of this role. So there are misconceptions in the market that we often see, and when we go to conferences, we hear it all the time. And I touched on this earlier. First, the technical reports are not approved by the regulator. The regulator samples the reports and passes judgment on whether they're properly prepared and filed or if there are deficiencies. But it's after the fact. So the responsibility for complying with the rules lies with, firstly, the qualified person, and secondly, with the issuing company. And of course, 43101 is just a reference to a piece of law, some legislature in a country. It doesn't imply anything about the property that's being talked about in a technical report, good, bad, or ugly. And the thickness of the report certainly has no bearing on whether it's a good report or a good property. So back in college, wasn't the old thing that you got an A if you threw your essay down the stairwell, and the one that fell the furthest got an A, and the light ones got a D? Well, it doesn't work like that for 43101. It's about pertinent information that's offered up in a reasonably understandable manner. And of course, the 43101 report does not guarantee anything. It's simply stating the facts about what you have in the ground. So, of course, it's legislature and a prescribed format. And what that means is there's a table of contents, and information on the general information on the property has to go in a certain chapter or item, as it's referred to in the vernacular. And anything to do with environmental or social or governance must be in item 20 in 43101, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the QP is responsible for the methods, the assumptions, the judgments used for verifying and interpreting that information. And Don has some more comments on deficiencies that are found with filings of these types of reports, and she'll focus firstly on reports that don't comply with the rules as stated by the legislation.
Thank you, Curtis. So now we get into some of the realities that now that we've made these investors so happy that they can look at these things, they trust their geologist, they trust their mining engineer, and oh my God, you know what? These reports are not perfect. You will see a wide variety in what I will say the quality and the amount of information in a technical report. So we go back to buyer beware. You are hiring somebody to do this report for you who is a qualified person. Yes, they may have a degree, they may be a member of one of the organizations, and they may have experience working. But what they end up choosing or deciding to put into their report is usually, well, it's a bit of compromises between what the information is available, what the company has and will tell you because you're relying on information from the company that you believe to be honest and truthful and would give you all that information. So don't expect that these reports all look the same. They look very different. And the agency, so this is the regulatory agency in Canada, has done several different case studies where they've gone back and looked at hundreds of reports to see, let's compare these and see how different they are, and is everyone actually complying? Do they write about every single item that they need to put into the report? Do they use one of these guidance documents and everything's done in a way that was to a industry standard? Well, they found out no, it's not that happy out there. There's actually a lot of differences in those reports. So this is one of these reviews that was done in 2021, and these are the top 5 non-compliance issues. The first one was in the historical estimates. So, and when they talk about Section 2.4, they're referring back to one of the items that's required by the format of the report. And the first one is the lack of source and date, main assumptions, and cautionary language when they report their historical estimates. Okay, I went up for several at a time. So the second one is the disclosure of exploration information. They're missing the assay procedures. How did you actually do that test? What's the name of the lab? What was the QA/QC data? So quality assurance, quality control data. Did you have any? Is it appropriate? What were the true widths? Are we talking about a vein? Are we talking about low grade, big deposits? What does this look like? And what are the higher grade intervals? Have you actually talked about any of those things? The fourth thing is the restricted disclosure. So did you omit the preliminary economic assessment caution for inferred resources? Were these measured and indicated? What's going on here? You need to put in a caution if it's an inferred resource. What were your exploration target ranges? Is there any cautionary language about that? The fourth thing was all disclosure of mineral resources or mineral reserves. Were you missing any of those categories? Should you have put a 0 there if there's none at all, or you just didn't report it? Were there any inferred that were added, and was that reported correctly? And then, did you only report what contained metal? So that is another item that you need to look at carefully. And did you include the names of those qualified persons? So you need to say who that person is. They should have this is right up in one of the sections, so it's not just adequate to put in the consent form that's in the back. And you need to talk about their relationship to the company. And you can have a relationship to that company, you just have to disclose it. And not everybody's been doing that correctly. Curtis, I hand it back to you to talk about some more unhappy issues.
Thank you. So the previous number of slides of bullets were actually deficiencies in contraventions to the Act itself. The next 5 refer to certain items of the report. So recall that I mentioned there's prescribed table of contents, and each of the chapters is referred to as an item. So these are shortcomings that we find, or that the regulatory agencies have been finding in the reports themselves. So item 3 would be the table of contents item called reliance on other experts. Now that is not to imply that you're relying on other technical experts. It's for the purposes of legal, political, environmental, or tax experts that aren't ordinarily defining the mineral prospect. Okay? These sorts of experts come into play later on, but for the purposes of a technical report that's divulging exploration and technical information about a mineral property, any reliance on those experts must be divulged through the qualified person. Secondly is item 12, data verification. Key point here. We've read, people in here are experienced with these sorts of technical reports, and we've seen data verification ad nauseum from the geologists. They do a fantastic job of stating how they verify their information. But for advanced projects, what is often omitted is the data verification by other technical experts, other qualified persons. Your geotechnical engineer with oriented core drilling and testing thereof and strength testing of the rock, the mining engineer and the underlying verification of the work that they've done, the metallurgical engineer, they're responsible for metallurgical test work. They should be divulging here how they verified that data. In item 11, and these are in order of frequency of deficiency, so that's why they're out of order from the table of contents. But the most common deficiency would be item 3, then 12, then 11. Sample preparation, analyses, and security. So this was mentioned in the previous slide deck by Don, that there are quite a number of QA/QC deficiencies that creep in, which is really a lack of thoroughness. But in not being there and not being divulged, what that does is it undermines the confidence of the information that you're trying to divulge to the public. Item 10 is drilling. In complex programs, there could be quite a number of drill holes. They all have to be identified. The collars have to be identified. The orientation of the drill hole must be identified. And of course, it's about the true widths of the pierce points that is important. A drilled intercept tells a part of the story, but it may not tell the most truthful story about how wide the intersection is, and that's crucial to estimating the volume of material that's mineralized. And of course, identifying within a length of core that has been assayed any higher grade intervals within that interval. So that's why you'll also often see a certain length of core with a certain grade, which contains a shorter length of core with a different grade. There we go. And mineral resource estimates. The qualified person must divulge the key assumptions, the parameters surrounding the estimation, the methods used. There are a number of different techniques that depend on the deposit type and the grade distribution within the mineralized zone. And of course, the QP is obligated to discuss any material risks that the qualified person recognizes. So this document is a living, breathing tool for us professionals in the industry, and it continues to change with the times. It has become the international standard since it was introduced 20 years ago, so we're proud of that in Canada, but the reality is it's only as good as the people who contribute to the reports that are based on this sort of standard. This sort of legislation has been used and unabashedly and to good utility by the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US when it decided to upgrade its reporting system for mineral properties. So the upgrade is now in place in USA. It's referred to as SK 1300. I presume that anyone that's been here may have heard of it in the USA. However, the important thing here to realize is that under its predecessor, Industry Guide 7, which is now retired and not referred to anymore and not utilized, only American-based companies could only report to the public proven and probable reserves. So that was a handy tool for any operating company, and it essentially barred exploration companies from reporting on work that they were doing, good work that they were doing in the field, and adding value to exploration property assets, raising money on that added value, and doing more good work to develop a mine. That was all barred to US-based issuers. And that's part of the reason why the Vancouver Stock Exchange has been so healthy in the past number of years. It's why 43101 has been adopted here and around the world. It's why Australian companies are showing up in Arizona and Nevada and Canada, because they have the ability to raise money on their stock exchanges to pour into the ground in their own countries and in USA. So now USA is finally caught up with the rest of the crowd, and you may see monies raised in US stock exchanges and applied to projects in Mexico or Canada or South Africa or Ghana in the near future. It will take some time, but it's coming. The 43101 rule was last revised in 2011, the reason being when it was first contemplated and brought out to the public, it focused heavily on exploration properties. And then we realized that there's more to this industry than that. There's development properties, there's operating properties, and they need to divulge more information about their activities. So the act was revised, it took an act of parliament, it was revised in 2011, And the industry continued to evolve and to change and to mature. Good example would be item 20, which is environmental, social, and governance issues. It used to be given 3 paragraphs or 2 paragraphs in the write-up, and I'm working on a 43-101 technical report right now, and that section is about 70 pages, because it's so important right now to make sure that the work has been done on the environmental front, and you divulge what you're doing, and the work is being done with the communities on the social aspects of your project. So that is currently under review. The governing bodies, the security commissions have gone out to the public, requested comment, and they're now divesting, what's the right word? They're digesting that information, and they'll be revising the act. And it'll probably take a couple of years, and then there will be a revision to that act in Canada, and it will set a new standard for how technical information is divulged to the public. Was that our last slide? Well, I thank you for your attention. I hope it was of some value to you.